And welcome to MADDS History Hour. We're going to continue along with the American Revolution. This week, the lead up to Saratoga. We might get to it today. We might not. If not, we'll talk about it next weekend. I'm joined as usual by MC. How are you doing today, dude?
Doing all right. Did you stay up too late last night?
Like 2:30 in the morning or something.
Yeah, I figured you were up partying a little bit. Are you all Halloweened out now? Did you get enough candy?
I'm actually eating a piece of Tootsie Roll right now.
So you got the candy tax going with your kids?
Hey, we gotta check it, make sure it's okay.
Candy tax, yeah.
Yeah.
Just tell them if you don't like this is what the Democrats do. I'm just teaching you a lesson in life. Just be glad I'm not. Just tell them. Just because this isn't Biden, or it'd be taking half.
Yeah. Or well, that's a hanging Chad. I need to recount this candy.
It's a joke, folks. It's a joke. We're just taking the piss out of people today.
Before we get started, though, I did watch this show, The Final 24. Right, it's like the last 24 hours of somebody's life. But mad taxation is stuff. Yeah, we also live in a republic, but not in my house. It's a dictatorship here. But I was watching. I watched a couple episodes. The last 24 of John Belushi's life. The asteroid was hours away from boarding a plane to get to LA to get to him.
Well, do you think Dan Aykroyd would have saved him? I don't think it would have mattered.
Probably not. With how many injection sites Belushi had, he was doing the speedballs in New York, and Aykroyd and his wife were there. So I think Aykroyd. I like the guy. I don't know him, obviously. But I think he knows more about what Belushi was using than he lets on.
I think he knows, and I think that Robert De Niro knows as well. I think Robert De Niro was a lot more involved in that situation, all right, than anybody wants to admit.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. It's called the Final 24. The Hunter S. Thompson one is interesting too. But we'll go ahead and get started. Unless you want to say something about the ultra-liberal Hunter S. Thompson.
Nope, I'm not going to talk about the druggie.
Hey, you met Nixon.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, let's get started with this, all right? So the first thing is if you notice on this timeline, all right, it goes over to Fort Ticonderoga, Orski, Fort Bennington, the Battle of Bennington in Vermont, and then it starts with Brandywine. We're going to talk. I want to talk a little bit about some of this that was going on, and this right here is the idea of the British plan. All right, now this has been put together where we're going. There are three now, stars in the British Army. Okay, Burgoyne, Howe, and Cornwallis. Okay, now Cornwallis has joined Howe down here in New York. Okay, their plan, was what we're going to do is we're going to defeat the colonies in the north, and then we're going to move south. This is what they all thought that they were going to do initially. All right, they gave Burgoyne enough forces, they thought, all right, to handle this situation. Right, Burgoyne was the one who came up with, we'll send leagues down here, and then I'll march down, and then you guys will send forces north, and we'll create a pincher movement. The problem right off the bat, all right, as you can see here, all right, is Gates, all right, is the general from the American general, right? They know that the St. Lawrence Seaway is a weak point and that they can be attacked, and so he sends a small force to deal with St. Leger, all right, on the left-hand side, and at the Battle of Ormsky, they basically put a stop to this. Now, this prevents Burgoyne, all right, from meeting up with Burgoyne and pinchering him. Worse, though, is Burgoyne is not informed that there is not going to be movement for the British up north. Okay, they're not going to attack the forces that are under Howe. Don't go north. So he doesn't have any other forces, and they're expecting this. So the first thing that Burgoyne does is, of course, he comes on down, right, and he hits Fort Ticonderoga. Now, in the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, the first day of the battle, the American commander doesn't realize that he's only looking at the scouting force of Burgoyne, and he seriously underestimates the strength of the British forces on the first day. Now, he decides to hang in there and hold out. Well, that goes really well until the next day, when the rest of Burgoyne's forces show up and they storm and they capture Fort Ticonderoga. All right.
Yeah, and also we removed already previously at least half the guns out of the fort.
Yeah, it has been denuded. It's not nearly as strong as it was, but it does create a situation where several American troops are captured. A number of them are captured, and so forth. And Burgoyne, thinking things are going well, moves on down. All right, continuing his attack. Now, if you go back to the timeline, however, right, well, you have this. This is really the Battle of Bennington is just a skirmish, but you end up with the Battle of Brandywine. Now, this is a result of the British changing tactics, and the British decide to move against Philadelphia. Okay, and Washington is forced to try and fight in Philadelphia. Washington thinks he's got the forces. He thinks he has the power, all right, to take on the British. The British, of course, because of their superior mentality, the superior ability of mobility, actually show up and use this as a holding force, just to keep the Americans from not realizing that the main force is coming across.
Yeah, they do it to Washington again.
Well, in this case, Washington really didn't realize. He really did not have a good understanding of the British and how the British were deployed. And this at this battle, he was in the greatest danger. He almost loses the entire American army is almost lost at this battle. All right, it is an absolute disaster. Howe hits Washington at the flanks. If it isn't for the fact that Sterling and Stevens redeployed to slow Howe down, that he would have captured the entire U.S. Army, Washington's entire army, and himself. It's because Sterling and Stevens recognize that there's a threat there, get informed that there's a threat, and move out to try and force Howe to deploy. And they do a good account of themselves, but the American forces, they're not well trained. They cannot stand and fight, all right, a standing battle with the British. Okay.
even with defenses, because you remember this is the battle for Philadelphia, so you're talking street to street combat in some areas until they get attacked on the flanks, and they have, well, first they redeploy, and then they try and, well, they don't try, they retreat.
They get overwhelmed, and of course this creates a complete retreat that Washington attempts to stop, but then realizes that it can't. The best they can do is retreat in good order, and they at least pull that off. They're at least able to save themselves, and while it's a massive victory for the British, all right, it isn't overwhelming in that they don't capture Washington and they don't capture the core of the American army. Now, they do capture a lot of the guns, right? A lot of the artillery from the United States, all right? Or the U.S. And, will become the U.S. forces, the rebel forces under Washington.
And it's a symbolic blow. The day before, you had Continental Congress flee town, pretty much.
Well, they flee. This opens the way to Philadelphia. They can't handle. They understand now that they can't stop the battle there, and it's going to lead later on to the British taking, all right, Philadelphia, all right, and that is a major blow to the American cause, because the Philadelphia at this point is the capital. This is where the Continental Congress is meeting.
Yeah, can they have Philly back? I think we're done with it.
Well, Philly's getting burned to the ground currently, so we don't need to worry about what it's going to be like pretty soon, but that's a separate issue. All right, now, one of the more interesting things that happens is that we haven't been talking about, and we need to discuss this a little bit, and that is where Benjamin Franklin is.
Well, yeah, I was going to discuss that after they take Philadelphia, but we kind of pretty much already said so. Franklin receives word of the British taking Philadelphia, and he quite masterfully deflects and goes, they didn't take Philadelphia. Philadelphia took Burgoyne. Because now Burgoyne has to sit in Philly.
How? Not Burgoyne, Howe.
Oh, Howe. Yeah, Howe, sorry. But now Howe has to sit in Philly. He has to leave a holding force. He can't let the Continentals get their capital back.
Well, it puts pressure on the Continentals, but it's also a point where the British. This is a major city. It is now different than New York. Okay, why is this important? Well, quite frankly, because if you have a military staying in one place for any length of time, all right, it gets a garrison mentality. Okay, this is something that a lot of people, that have studied warfare for a long time, they understand what happens. A really sharp warfighting machine can really do a lot of damage if it goes in the garrison and stays there, because it's very difficult, all right, once you've been there for so long, not to, start relaxing, start taking the pleasures of the city, especially for the officer corps. And once the officer corps is engaged in the, pleasantries around it, one of the things that happens is an instant lowering of discipline, all right? Because the officers have to be there in order to reinforce discipline, all right, to establish it and keep it there. The NCOs can't do it on their own, all right? And quite frankly, the NCOs slowly get start partaking in that kind of, mentality, and they lose a lot of the battle-hardened edge. All right. So leaving New York to go into battle wasn't necessarily a bad idea. All right. But you're going from that now over to Philadelphia, and you start running into the other problems. Now, a lot of what's left of Philadelphia, you got to remember, a lot of the Patriots left. All right. They absolutely fled. It wasn't just the Congress that fled. Anybody that would consider themselves a patriot in a lot of ways, was encouraged to leave. And most of them did. All right. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so all of a sudden, the loyalists, all right, well, they had the power of the British around them. All right. And what's more is they were now in ascendancy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just officers and NCOs. I mean, you have the enlisted men partaking of, ladies of the night, as they would call them, right?
Right.
So, I mean, the discipline just breaks down from top to bottom.
Right. Now, you can see that this happens in September, right? And there's going to be another battle pretty soon, but we're not going to get into the Battle of Germantown, all right? But we're going to start talking now, even though this happens in two separate areas, we need to talk about, we need to return back to this, all right, and talk about the Battle of Saratoga. Burgoyne, through this entire march, has had the idea that, well, it's just a standard march. We just keep going. He, however, is moving very, very slow. You can tell that, okay, you got June 17th, and he only gets to the southern part where he had partial movement not via land, but via, waterways to get down to Fort Ticonderoga, but he's moving slowly because once you get into the wooded lands, he wants to, keep his baggage train. He is a dandy who doesn't want to give up his personal luxuries on this march. So he's not moving with any kind of speed. Okay, they hear about, he captures Fort Ticonderoga. Everyone's thinking that everything's fine. This is one of the reasons why Howe goes, you got enough forces, I can ignore this. Right? Well, the Americans set up, and you end up with the first what they consider the first Battle of Saratoga. Right? Now, Gates has solidified in the southern part down here. All right, and he's behind breastworks, and he's expecting the British to come this way. What he's ignoring is Benedict Arnold. Now, Benedict Arnold is telling him, we need to secure our flank. They're going to attack our left flank. Right? And he wants to move out and put troops, most of his troops over here. Right? Gates refuses. But he does tell Arnold, after relenting a little bit, and say, okay, you can take Morgan and you can go out there and see what happens. Okay? Well, this is what happens. The British American forces, which are undersupplied, and they don't have the vast number of troops, meet the British, all right, in a standoff over here at Freeman's Farm. All right. Now, this is a holding action more than anything else. The American forces do attempt to attack. They are repulsed, and then eventually the British overwhelm their initial positions and push them back. But what they don't do is they do not capture the Americans, and they just capture the field. All right. What Burgoyne was expecting is this to totally smash through and then bring the fight right down here to Gates, and that doesn't happen. All right, and it doesn't happen because the British, as strong as they are, you can tell that the strength through their cannons and everything else, are not 100% because Burgoyne has split his forces. Okay.
Well, that, and it looks like the terrain is quite rough as well. I'm wondering how deep those rivers are.
These are more just creeks. They're not really rivers. I mean, they can be forded fairly, but it does give you, if you're in a higher position, you do have an advantage. You do have an advantage if you get into a higher position. The main thing is the roads, right? Securing the roads, and as you can see, the Americans do a halfway decent job of holding the roads. At this point, Burgoyne rethinks this and says, okay, we've attacked from this side. Let's continue this later. Okay. And what you have is the British attempt to try and force their way through. The Americans under Arnold. Now this is about a month later. The Americans under Arnold, all right, see this and immediately attack the wing of Burgoyne's troops. And this is led, all right, the counterattack is led directly by Arnold. Okay. They come through, they smash through the Bremen Heights. Arnold personally leads this attack and is injured badly. Because the Americans take these heights, however, it makes this entire position untenable and then forces Burgoyne to try to retreat, which he attempts to do. This is in the middle of October, but they are surrounded then, and they're forced to surrender. The Americans capture all of the supplies, all the British troops, all right, including Burgoyne, all right, and send them back. This is a major U.S. victory coming right after the fall of Philadelphia.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Arnold's injury for a second, because he's injured leading the charge at the Americans try to flank him. And he doesn't get shot, if I remember correctly. His horse got shot, or he got shot in the leg, something like that.
Yeah, he gets shot in the leg.
And
he has several wounds, actually.
Yeah, the horse falls over on him.
Yes.
And he goes, "Where are you hurt, sir?" My leg, but I wish it was my heart, is what he's reported to say. What do you think? If he would have died at Saratoga, then West Point would still be Fort Arnold, right?
Probably. Most likely. If he would have, he would have died. And what's more is that his name would have gone down as one of the greatest leaders of the battle in American history, right? The fact is that with him dead, there's nothing to stop the promotion of Morgan and Gates. So therefore, they would have given him the credit that he was due. All right. That he's the one that led the charge that did this, and they probably would have even given him the real credit that he deserved, which is for coming back and saying, this is the battle plan. Because Gates was not engaged in this battle the way he needed to be.
Well, they called him Granny Gates for a reason, right? He was timid.
Gates came from military stock, but he had a very, and this is something else that we should have been talking about before, right? Which is the society in which all of this is taking place, because the Americans that are there don't live in the same society that we live in today. Okay. In America, there were areas where if you dressed in a certain manner, okay, you had to be of a certain lineage. Okay, you couldn't, it was against the law for you to overdress yourself, because there was a social hierarchy that was important in the American colonies. Even if it wasn't quote unquote royalty, it was kind of an aristocratic mindset. And it stems from a number of different aspects of being British, right? There were certain aspects that still were in play. Now, Gates came from an aristocratic military family and Gates himself had been in the British Army for years, in the Redcoats for years, prior to becoming, joining the cause. Gates also felt that he himself should have been the leader of all the American forces in the colonies. He was one of the people that was constantly writing and overemphasizing his experience and his abilities to lead vis-a-vis everyone, including Washington, which eventually gets him sacked by Washington. Okay. But
you can only go behind your commanding officer or commander in chief so many times, right?
And eventually it gets him, sacked, but not initially, right? Washington, in some ways, exemplifies the leader who has a lot of loyalty to his subordinates, not just. And this is one of the reasons why Washington's men loved him. Washington didn't just treat his troops as if they were expendable, widgets to throw out there on the battlefield. Gates did look at it that way. The fact that Benedict Arnold was even with Gates was due to the fact that Washington ordered him up there. All right. Gates looked at Arnold as being Washington's spy. He really hated Arnold. Okay, I'm not exaggerating this. All right. Even though Arnold came up with some troops with Morgan, Gates did not have an appreciation at all that Arnold was there. Now, Arnold had the misconception that once he got there, Gates would be his servant, that it would be his subordinate, right? And it was like, no, you guys are not supposed to get along to stop this battle. No one had delineated, a clear chain of command here. And that's to Washington's detriment, because he expected these guys to get along, and they didn't.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like, Bragg and Johnston. They fucking hated each other.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and it showed in this battle. All right, but this battle was a great victory, and it changes the dynamic. All right, with vis-a-vis the United States, because it was a victory that no one saw coming. It was an entire British army that surrendered, all right, and the capture of a British general. Okay, nobody expected this. All of a sudden, it looked as if the Americans can win again, and therefore, okay, the Franklin is able to, utilize this to secure French support. The French had been very, slow to support. They said they would give words of kindness, but they weren't willing to really release a lot of the weapons and a lot of the treasure. Right? Now, they had sent Lafayette. Okay, Lafayette had arrived, but they sent Lafayette, but they didn't send a lot of troops under Lafayette.
Yeah, and the King of France, Louis, refused to see Franklin for a long time. I believe until after this battle.
Exactly.
They did allow Franklin to fundraise, which is something later on that us Americans do not allow the French to do here during their revolution.
The other person that they sent, people forget this, at the same time you got Franklin in France, you also have another individual. You have Adams there. Right?
Adams only shortly arrived, though. He had not been there quite as long, and
he hadn't been there as long, but he had been there during this portion of it. Right? Now, the first thing that Adams, like like a lot of these people, has an arrogance about them. He at least, however, as much as he despises, and he personally despised, all right, Benjamin Franklin, right? While he despised Benjamin Franklin on a personal level, okay, because, quite frankly, he was for lack of a better term, he was a Puritan. Okay. Benjamin Franklin is seeing all sorts of people. He's going to the French parties. He's, giving off this impression of being a fop, what we would, a flamboyant playboy. Even though he's not sleeping around, of course, there's lots of rumors of all this and everything. Adams is a Puritan. Okay, he thinks this behavior to be absolutely unseemly. Okay, he thinks this kind of behavior is absolutely scandalous. He does not engage in French society. He doesn't endear himself in French society. All right. He doesn't go to these. He is like the stiff guy at the parties. All right, when they forced him to actually attend some of these things, he was the standoffish, guy that nobody talked to at the party, right?
Yeah, and it's probably just in a miniseries on HBO, but I think it kind of spells it out, even if it's not accurate. There's a scene where Benjamin Franklin's talking to Adams, and he's like, "You're gonna have to learn French. I suggest you take a mistress." And Adams was just flabbergasted by this, the mere suggestion.
And the reason, of course, that Benjamin Franklin is doing that, he's not necessarily serious about a mistress. Because he's poking him. Benjamin Franklin was known for his jokes, folks. All right, and he did. He was a practical joker in a lot of ways. All right, but he always did think that Adams was too stiff. But the two of them, even regardless of that, both of them recognized the abilities of the other man. All right, while Benjamin Franklin, all right, was this outgoing kind of personality, he did understand the hard driving nature and the ability to organize, all right, keep things in an organized manner that Adams came with. Adams was an extraordinarily hard worker. He was an extraordinarily organized individual, all right? On the other side, one of the things that Adams admired about Franklin is that Franklin was, for all intents and purposes, intelligent. They would have discussions about how to move forward and how to utilize both their skill sets together, rather than, argue with one another about who's on top and who's on, who's first, etc. They didn't have the kind of how do I say it, adversarial relationship that you had that many of the Patriots actually had.
Yeah, and I know it's moving forward, but just because I'm thinking about it, it popped in my head. Another good portrayal of Adams and Benjamin Franklin is when the war is won, someone needs to go to England, right? And Benjamin Franklin goes, I think you should go. And John Adams is like, they'll hate that. He's like, I know.
Well, but Benjamin Franklin's also doing that just to be a dick too, because he doesn't want to go to England. Let's be honest. But no, they had an effective working relationship. All right, that's the difference. All right, their personal feelings toward the other person. All right, on both for both these leaders, both these founding fathers came way down the list. All right, for first, let's secure independence. Now, this was the foremost thing in their minds. Right? How are we going to secure independence? One of the big things, though, that comes out of this is the French agree to basically allow the Americans to use their ports. Okay, this is very important because the Americans are basically using French ships in a type of piracy, all right, against the British, all right, by flying the American flag.
Yeah, the father of the American Navy, what's his name?
John Paul Jones.
Yeah. He that's where he would retreat to after he would attack the shipping lanes, or didn't he bomb England a couple times?
Yeah, he shelled the shoreline a couple times. All right. Now he himself was Scottish initially before he became a patriot, so he never really liked the English to begin with, and those of course the Americans exploited that dynamic. He was also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he was impressed initially, right? And while he was serving with the British Navy, right, initially, he never forgot the fact that he was not British, right? That he was not English, right? And so his rebellion, just grew up for that standpoint. Even though the British themselves, the British sailors initially looked upon in the early days looked upon him as a rising star in the British Navy initially, before the Revolutionary War. It's an amazing group of people that have been dispatched, all right. But it's Franklin understood something that I think that Adams never did, which was French society, the importance of French society, all right, in moving the king. You were not going to succeed in getting support for the American cause without gaining the support of the French upper society, the French aristocracy. And that's what we're talking about, by the way. We're not talking about the peasants. We're not talking about the average Frenchman. Okay. Now, the average Frenchman, if they thought about Benjamin Franklin at all, looked upon him as an intelligent man who, because of all the propaganda, how he tamed lightning, etc. All right, they looked upon him from a scientific aspect, not necessarily as a statesman or a spokesman for America, but they really didn't care about the American cause one way or the other. All right.
Well, it's hard to care when you have to walk through your own feces to go to a shitty job at the docks. Just say
that's very true. All right. You also got to look at the fact that they looked at Americans at this point as the rebellion Englishmen. All right. Well, okay, but do you trust the English? The English don't trust the French. Do you think the French ever trust the English? It doesn't happen now. Okay.
Sure, I thought the French were a trusting lot.
Sure they are.
So the king initially promises weapons and naval support and a little bit of army support. But Benjamin Franklin goes to the king repeatedly with his hat out. We need thimbles. We need this, that, and pretty much everything. Even for Benjamin Franklin, that had to be hard to sell. You know what I mean? Oh, we can win on our own, but we need this list, and the list just keeps going, as he's holding it up.
Well, he the other thing about this is the French declare war on the British. Now, this can't be understated. The fact that the French decided to go to war at that point changes the dynamic in Britain, because now they have whereas before the colonies and what was going on in the colonies is kind of like it's captured their imagination. It is on their minds, but it's an internal affair. Okay, that it's like an unseemly affair that we're having to deal with, but we'd rather we didn't, right? But when you bring in a war now with France, now it's a threat to the entire nation. All right, the mentality switches as the fight in the American colonies, all right, is a sidelight now because our main adversary is across the channel.
Yeah, and I don't know if they outwardly said it. They probably did. I mean, the British don't hold back usually. But how dare these colonial little peasants? They run to the French. We were just there 20 years ago fighting the French for these little bastards, right?
There is that's going on, but the big thing, of course, is the threat now, and you all the major shipping that was being given to Howe, all the support of the British fleet has to be reallocated now. Okay, you're not going to see the kind of shipping that brought over Howe and everything in the hundreds of ships. They have to withdraw a significant number of ships back to the British Isles to prepare for the bigger conflict with the French. All right, and it also expands the battlefield in that the French begin attacking the British colonies in the Caribbean. It becomes now a free-for-all. So the British can no longer focus strictly on the colonies. So this is an amazing turn of events, all right, that the Americans are able to gain from this.
Well, and I've always kind of wondered why the Spanish just stayed out of it. Because right then, it would have been a perfect time for the Spanish to seize British assets in the Caribbean.
Oh, okay, but the Spanish hated the French more than they hated the British.
Really? When they were both Catholic nations?
They both share a major border, a land border.
That's a fair point.
And they'd had a number of land battles, okay, right there. So if they had joined the French, all right, would it have helped them? Perhaps not. All right, but the Spaniards were not going to. They weren't going to trust the French. All right, the British still had Gibraltar. All right, they'd already seized Gibraltar at this point, I believe. All right, and the French had done nothing to help them with that. All right, so I mean, what were they going to do?
Well, and the more now that I think about it, all the Spanish cared about at this time was shipping their gold from South America. So they're
they are way on at this time they are way on the decline. Okay, the gold shipments, the big golden fleets are not there anymore. Their colonies exist, but you're not having the golden fleets sail, right? Because they basically taken all that gold out of the colonies in their minds, all right? They are interested in just maintaining the colonies as they are, all right, rather than trying to expand the colonies anymore. And what's worse is if they had joined some of their other possessions in the area, they couldn't hold them. Okay, for example, at this point, Florida is still Spanish. All right, how are you going to hold Florida? There's no way to hold Florida.
Right. That's true. What do you think Washington's reaction was when he realized their tiny rebellion just turned into a world war?
Oh, I think he thanked his lucky stars. All right. After this battle, after Saratoga, right, is announced and so forth, they go into Valley Forge, and they have to winter through Valley Forge. All right.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that more in depth. So if we have to just have a shorter episode to catch up, we can.
But we can also do something else. Let's talk about this battle. I wasn't sure if we were going to get to this battle. Let's talk about this battle. All right. This was an attempt by Washington to go on the offensive and drive the British out of Philadelphia. It is an absolute failure. All right. The plan itself is against British and Hessian forces. As you can see from all of these lines of march that they're expecting, the American forces, they're expecting to coordinate a series of movements to attack in an attempt to take Howe by the flank. Okay?
They just weren't disciplined enough at this point. They didn't have the drilling.
They didn't have the drill. They didn't have the discipline. They're not trained to maneuver this way. And as a result, even though they initially have success with the first push here, they're eventually just pushed back. And they started fleeing the battlefield, fleeing. All right. Once again, this is another one of the incidents where Washington's own personality comes to the fore. All right. That turns what is a rout into a retreat. All right. So it's a positive from that standpoint, but it's a victory by the British, but it's also something that is used by Washington as a demarcation point. Washington now is forced to accept the fact that these forces are not prepared. Okay, that these forces are not going to. They can't take the British on. They're not trained. They're not disciplined enough. They're not drilled enough to actually coordinate such a complicated movement. Now, this is also something that a lot of commanders go through. When you create a battle plan, the simpler the battle plan is, all right, as a general rule, the better. Why? Because the simpler the more simple a battle plan is, the less something can go wrong. Battles inherently are fraught with all sorts of dangers. The more complicated a battle plan is, the more likely something that you weren't expecting can go wrong and turn the battle. So you try to keep your plans as simple as you can. This was, well, I mean, it was an interesting attempt by Washington, but it was way too complicated for what his troops could do.
Well, I see your point. Keep it simple, stupid, right? I understand that, but I mean, there's example after example of Lee dividing his forces, having complicated battle plans, and carrying the day.
Yes and no. All right. A lot of Lee's battle plans never come to fruition. A lot of Lee's attempts at battle, the coordination is just poor, and they don't go off the way Lee plans. If you take a look at, but once again, that's all well and good to bring up, Robert E. Lee, but that's at this point 80 years in the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, Napoleon as well had complicated battle plans.
Not really. Napoleon had a very simple strategy. Right, he really did overall. Right, Napoleon was always forced to act as the hammer and then bring in the anvil from the sides. All right, I mean, bring the anvil and then bring the hammer in from the sides. That he was always in an attempt to go around the flanks of the enemy. All right, freeze the enemy. All right, this is where some of this stuff goes into. The first thing you got to do is you got to find the enemy. Once you find the enemy, you got to fix the enemy. What does that mean? Well, that means making sure that the enemy doesn't move. All right, and then, all right, you find him, you fix him, then you destroy him. Okay, well, how do you destroy him? You don't destroy him unless you have overwhelming force. His strong points, you destroy him by attacking his weak points. Once you've fixed him in place. Okay. Washington was just learning the craft here of generalship, and he attempts this complicated maneuver because, quite frankly, he outnumbered the British at this point. And if he could have taken the flanks, it would have been a great victory. But it couldn't. His troops just couldn't pull it off. They just did not have the discipline to do it. And how basically just for all intents and purposes easily repulses the American forces here, because the American forces once they hit and the return fire happens, they had a tendency of running. Once the British forces started moving forward, they would tend to run.
Is there a reason why Washington decided not to conduct a siege?
You didn't have the forces for a siege.
Okay, because you said he outnumbered the British at this battle. So,
well, it's one thing to have 11,000 to 9,000. That doesn't mean you overwhelmingly outnumber the enemy.
That's a fair point. So next week, I'm gonna have to do some research on a certain Prussian, aren't I? We're gonna be talking about the drills and Valley Forge, correct?
Yes, we are going to have to talk about the drills in the Valley Forge. We're going to have to talk about the winter at Valley Forge. Valley Forge is a dangerous time for the Americans. There are a number of things that happened at Valley Forge that people don't know about because it's not really talked about in their history books.
Yeah, and this Prussian guy, even though he pretty much wrote the book on instruction for Washington's army, he was a liar.
He's a character. Let's leave it at that. Let's leave it at that.
All right. We're about to wrap it up. You've been taking the weeks off because you've been working, right? Or are you going to go back to your morning show? Right around the corner.
I'm going to go back to my morning show as much as possible. There's still going to be a few hiccups here and there, but generally it'll be in the morning.
All right. Well, thank you for everybody that came out. Thank you anybody that watches this later. Tomorrow, after I do stuff with the family for my birthday, I still plan on doing a birthday stream. So look forward to that. Good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week for some more history.
Good night, everybody.